The pink wall of bigotry, which surrounds the Idaho 4 case, has officially caused me to root for the acquittal of Bryan Kohberger. And if you don't like that, then you can thank the leading ladies of the YouTube true crime scene. At this point, the hatred, vitriol, and bigotry these women have for the male gender places them firmly into the category of domestic terrorists. It is quite clear that their coverage of the Idaho 4 case was never about justice. It has instead devolved into little more than a soapbox from which angry, bitter female supremacists can spew their bigotry and hatred. When a woman, or a man for that matter, implies that incels are inherently sinister, they are wrong. The extreme majority of people who are involuntarily celibate actually adore and potentially even worship the opposite gender, or whatever their deal may be. The frustrations that these individuals endure typically manifest outwardly as depression and not as aggression. And even when these people do graduate to violence, it's usually just self-harm that occurs. There are a small handful of examples that certain people use as the poster boys for violent incels. However, the only one who holds even the slightest inkling of merit in that regard would be Elliot Rodger, and they've been beating that dead horse for 9 sadly misinformed years. In reality, ER was simply a violent sociopath who also happened to have issues with social rejection, and these two conditions are not inherently interconnected. You see, not all violent sociopaths are incels, and not all incels are violent sociopaths. It is extremely irresponsible of certain individuals to go out of their way to endlessly perpetuate the conflation of these two completely independent circumstances. By lumping in the 99.9% of everyday incels with the mass red rumming type of incels, they are inadvertently mocking a huge number of completely normal people who simply wish to give and receive love, but have yet to find a partner who will reciprocate that love. But these content creators don't want to talk about the many millions of normal everyday incels that exist amongst us. No. They only want to talk about the extremely isolated and frankly anomalous incidents where, quote, pretty girls are harmed by violent psychopaths. These women of true crime want to imagine themselves as pretty young girls who could potentially fall victim to the same violence, and so they become advocates for the deceased. But all they're really doing is attempting to play the victim by proxy in a sad and embarrassing ritual of deluded self-affirmation. This is looksism at its absolute worst and reveals the cruel and vain, sadistic nature lurking within some of these people. The overwhelming majority of incels want nothing more than a partner to love, adore, and share their lives with, and these are traditional values. So, the women who erroneously conflate all incels with a handful of violent sociopaths are effectively declaring themselves enemies of traditional family values. A loving, synergistic family life is the goal of the typical incel. Why must these female supremacist bigots espouse so much hatred for such a wonderful and wholesome thing? Are these women really evil like that? Is that why they're so callously anti-male? Is that why so many of them have chosen to selfishly sell out their children's developmental futures in exchange for 18 years of child support payments? I can't say for sure, but there's much more to discuss. Elliot Rodger and others who have committed heinous crimes under the banner of incel were all in their late teens and early 20s. BK was 28 and was on the verge of obtaining a PhD. I'm pretty sure he was way past any kind of incel rage stage at this point in his life. He spent the last several years grinding away, learning the intricacies of the legal system. That sounds to me like someone who is focused on improving their future, and not someone who is sitting around festering over random loose college chicks and lashing out like a crazed teenage boy on a movie-inspired slash fest. What's most disheartening is the fact that Ashley Banfield can completely fabricate an alleged termination letter and attach a ridiculous misogyny narrative to it, and all of these angry bigots are so eager to run with it even though it's never been proven to be factual or legitimate. This massive failure on their part makes them lose all credibility and proves that they are much more interested in projecting hatred upon the male gender than they are with conducting a legitimate murder investigation. There is no termination letter, but let's imagine that this outlandish narrative was true and he really was tougher on the girls. Well, technically, it can be argued that because women are held to much lower standards than men in the fields of employment and academia, All BK was trying to do was ensure that the female students were doing their best and truly learning the materials, instead of just being handed their law degrees on a silver platter in the name of social justice and so-called equity. If he truly was doing the things they've claimed, then he was in actuality protecting America's legal system from being occupied by a generation of half-assed true crime fans who have no business dealing with serious life and death court proceedings. And this would actually make him a hero of sorts. It seems that if this special treatment of females is true, then it proves that he actually cared about the future of the criminal justice system. Can the female supremacist bigots of the YouTube true crime scene say that they've done anything remotely as monumental for the sake of humanity? No, they can't. Instead, they'll just keep exploiting the grisly deaths of pretty young girls and using the money they get from YouTube to pay for their next sleazy stripper-esque neck tattoo or cosmetic injection. Like I said in previous videos, women need to be constantly micromanaged for their own good and for the good of our society. I'm only saying what needs to be said, and even if BK is guilty, there's a much bigger picture here than just a few small details that a handful of lonely, bitter, and jealous dusties want you to remain focused upon. If BK is proven guilty, I have no problem acknowledging and accepting that, but I'm not going to stand by and let this case be turned into a safe harbor for the hate-filled agendas of a few random lowbrow female supremacists.